Hi everyone, Leah here from EurekaCrystalBeads.com with another fun beading video for you. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to go check out the rest of our channel, and if you like what you see, hit the subscribe button and notification bell and you'll always know when we're posting new content. Today's video is a really fun bracelet design. It's going to have two strands of beautiful summery looking pearls in pink coral and turquoise. These are pearls by Swarovski, and we're going to have some beautiful seed beads and a spectacular accent to this bracelet, which is going to be a bezeled Rivoli in Ultra Coral Reef A bead, which is just such a hot color for this summer and this whole year actually. So let me give you a close-up of what we'll be using. So we have a Miyuki Delica right here in a very lovely pale blue, and we have a Miyuki 15 right here in a lovely metallic gold. We have our two pearl colors, and then also sitting in these trays you're going to see our Rivoli right here, and then we have our tiara cast toggle as well as a jump ring that we'll be using to help the Rivoli accent orient the correct way. Okay, so this is the super fun part, but we're going to do this part second. We're going to do this later. We're going to start with the actual base of the bracelet first, so we will get back to this. Now, the first thing we want to do may seem like a small step, but it's pretty important that we do it up front, and that is going to be attaching the jump ring to the loop side of our toggle. We're going to attach it right here, and the reason that is important is that that jump ring is going to take up some space in that loop, and that's going to make a difference when we're doing a beaded loop with our 15s through that same loop on the toggle. We want to make sure that we're fully aware of how much space we're going to have to work with. So it's important to get this jump ring on first. And so I'm just using 2 pairs of chain nose pliers to get that to happen. Just gently rocking that jump ring back and forth until it meets and is smooth right where the 2 ends of the jump ring join together. Just like that. Okay, now that we have our jump ring attached to our toggle, we can start on the bracelet portion of our project. So I'm using a size 12 needle, and I'm using 6-pound Fireline, and I have about the amount of 5 times what I want my total bracelet length to be. And the reason is because it's going to be a 2-strand bracelet, and we want to go back through each of those strands twice. So there's about 4 times the length, and then you always want to have a bit extra to play with. So do about 5 times the length of what you want your total bracelet length to be as far as how you wear it around your wrist. And we're going to start with the side that has our jump ring on it, which is the loop side of your toggle. I'm going to empty out some of our beads here. So I have 2 different colors of pearls. I thought the pink coral would match the Rivoli really beautifully, and then I wanted something to accent, and I think turquoise is a really great color to match along with the coral. I think they really enhance each other. So I'm going to be using these seed beads not only for the bezel later for our Rivoli, which I'll put over here, but I'm also going to use them to go in between the pearls as well. I think this is a really nice way to add a little bit more fluidity to your bracelet. So and on top of that, it'll be a beautiful accent as well. So I'm going to start by picking up 8 of my little gold 15s here, but I'm going to pick up 4, go through the loop of my clasp, and then pick up the other 4. And the reason is that because of that jump ring there, this little beaded loop most likely will not be able to float right through the loop of our toggle. So we want half of the seed beads loaded on before we go through the toggle, and then the other half afterwards. So that way our toggle will be situated right in the center of the little beaded loop. But my other 4 came right off my needle. We're going to bring this to within a few inches of the end of our thread. As always, make sure to leave a tail that's long enough that you can weave it out later. So for me, that's just a few inches of Fireline. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take our tail and our working thread, and we're going to tie them in a square knot. This is pretty temporary, so you don't have to worry about this being what holds your bracelet together. This is just temporary, and it's going to be reinforced quite a bit as we create our bracelet. So we get a little beaded loop right there. And you can see we have plenty of room for our seed bead loop to move around nicely and that jump ring. You don't want to have anything so crowded that things start to sit stiffly. Okay, now we're going to load on 5 of our 15s before we start with one of our pearl colors. And the reason for that is when you have 2 strands of beads next to each other, it's a really good idea to have them taper down as you get closer to the clasp. And so our 15s are going to do that. So as our strands lay side by side at the clasp ends, they'll both of those strands will end with a little section of 5 15s on each one, and that's what will allow the 2 strands to lay nicely next to each other. So this is that first little group of 5. And then I'm going to pick my coral color first, and I want to have some contrast here. So I could do the gold beads in between the coral and the blue delicas in between the turquoise, but I'm going to swap that just to add some fun to this. So I'm actually going to have the blue delicas in between the coral, and I'll end up using the gold in between the turquoise. So what I'm going to do is just start to get this strung up, and I'll see you back here in a minute for when we get to the other side and how you turn back around. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of my bracelet, stringing on my first strand, and I've ended with a pearl and then 5 of those gold size 15 seed beads. Now I'm going to pick up the 8 that I need to go through the loop of the clasp. And again, like before, we could do the 4, the clasp, and then the 4, but in this case we don't have anything else going through this loop, so we can actually pick up all 8 at once. But if you're using a clasp that has a particularly small loop here, you may still have to pick up half and half. Okay, simply go through the loop of your clasp here, and then watch those for those 5 15s that you started with, because you're almost going to want to pretend as if those 5 together are a bead, and you're going to go down through that bead, or in this case it's 5, because we want to make sure that we recognize the difference between the 5 that are going to help with the 2 strands sitting next to each other, and then the 8 that are part of our beaded loop. So you're going to go down through the 5 and then back down through all of your beads. Whatever your needle can happen to poke through each pass is good. And this is going to help to reinforce our strand. I'm going to pull it tight and pull it, you'll get it the best tightness if you pull it in the direction towards the rest of the bracelet. And you can see what we have up here. Okay, and now I'm just going to go back down through all the beads, and I'll show you how to get started with the next strand on the next side in just a minute. Okay, I traveled back down to the first side, the side that had my toggle loop and my jump ring. I traveled all the way back down. I went up those 5 15s there. I went up through my loop, and now I'm coming back down through the loop. I'm not having gone through those 5 yet. So basically, if you want to, depending on how the loop was created, you're coming down from either bead 1 of your loop or bead 8, depending on how you want to think about which side was the beginning. But now I'm going to pick up a new group of 5s, because this is going to start the second strand, the strand with my turquoise pearls. And these 2 lines of 15s together are going to allow these 2 strands to sit nicely right next to each other. So I have my 5 there. And then I can simply start picking up my pearls and my 15s. Now, because the 15s are a hair smaller than those delicas, our strands may not be 100% exact, so you may end up having to add an additional pearl to this side, and that should get it to be pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of these strung up, but I'll give you an idea of how it's going to look to start. Like that. So I'll be back in a minute with this strung up. Okay, I have my turquoise beads strung up, and I was right. It was just simply 1 additional pearl needed to have them be the exact same size to make up for the fact that the 15s in between my turquoise pearls are slightly smaller than the delicas in between my pink coral pearls. So the last thing I did now is I picked up my 5 15s for the end. And as far as where I'm going to put my needle, remember, we're going to bypass the 5 that are already there, because the 5 I have in my needle are going to sit next to the 5 that are already there. So instead, the beads I'm going to go up into are the beads from my beaded loop. So those 8 beads. Just like that. We get our nice clean ending. We're going to loop back up around and through. And then we're going to go back down the 5 15s that we just added, so the 5 that are leading right into our turquoise beads, because then we're going to go through all our turquoise beads to reinforce and head right back down to the other side of the bracelet. Just whatever your needle happens to pop through. It's going to seem a little loosey-goosey right now because it hasn't been tightened up yet. Just like that. Okay, so I'm going to head down my turquoise strand, and I'll see you back in a minute. Okay, so I wove down my turquoise strand to reinforce it, and then I headed right up into my beaded loop, back down through the 5 15s that are heading into my pink coral section, and that's where I am now. I'm about an inch or so into my pink coral section, and this is where I'm going to start to weave out this thread. So if you've never woven out a thread before, it's pretty simple. I'm going to just take my needle and catch myself behind the threads that are going through, or going, already through the beads that I'm going behind. Pull almost all the way through, you get a little bit of a loop, go through your loop. Pull the knot down. Go through another few beads, whatever your needle just happens to pop through. Again, catch your needle behind the threads that are already going through your beadwork in that same area. Pull down until you see your loop. Go through your loop. Just make sure you pull your loop down nice and slowly so that way it closes in the exact spot that your working thread was exiting, and so it doesn't shift over and try to close down on the other side of that bead, because then you'll end up with thread on the outside of your bead, and you don't want that. So you're going to do about four knots or so, and then weave a little bit more after your last knot. You want to make sure you don't snip off your thread right where you did your last knot, because that compromises the integrity of that knot. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that up, and then I'm going to get set up to show you how to make our beautiful, fun Rivoli accent. Okay, so the bracelet portion of our project is completed. I also stuck a needle on that tail, and I wove that tail in as well. I did do that down the turquoise section since I wove the other thread out through the coral section. And we have here technically a lovely completed bracelet. I have to tell you, it's extremely comfortable to wear. The only thing that might look a little funny is that random jump ring hanging off, but like I said, that's going to come into play with our Rivoli. So our Rivoli will sit facing the right direction. So I'm going to put this aside for now, and we're going to show you how to do our Rivoli bezel. I have one here almost completed that I'll go back to in a minute after I get you started. And I do want to let you know that if I go a little fast, just know that I am also linking below a video that I've done that breaks down the Rivoli bezeling in much more granular detail, and it goes much slower and step by step for you. This is going to be a little bit more abbreviated, but still all of the steps shown you. The other one will just really go a lot slower in case that's what you need, in case you've never done a Rivoli bezel before. So I have on my size 12 needle some 6-pound fire line. I have about 2.5 feet or so here. That should be plenty to do this. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up 36 of my delicas. So I have my 36 delicas loaded on, and of course I did double check that I had the correct amount, because if we're off by even one, this bezel will not work. So make sure you double check and ensure that you have 36 delicas there. 36 is the number you want for a 14 millimeter Rivoli. Okay, now I'm going to take my tail and my working thread, and I'm going to tie them in a square knot. That's right over left and left over right, like a double knot, but that second knot is backwards. And this is just going to temporarily hold our ring together, and just like with the other part of the bracelet, this knot area will get plenty more reinforcement, but this is just temporary. You're going to make yourself a little beaded ring, and then you're going to take your needle and you're going to travel through about 1/3 of that ring. This will help to pull the knot into the beadwork, which will still allow for plenty of room inside the bead that houses the knot. So don't worry about that. These delicas are wonderful for having nice large holes, and we're not going to need to go back through each delica a million different times. Okay, you want to make sure that your ring is still nice and tight. Now, Once I have a ring that's nice and tight, I like to just roll it in my fingertips a little bit. This will loosen it up just a little. I don't want it to be so loose that I can see any fire line in between the beads. I don't want my beads to be able to wiggle, but I don't want them so tight that they're stiff either. So I just like to loosen it up just a little bit, just to make sure that they can have a little bit of rolling movement, and that kind of helps to give me the right tension to start off with. Now we're going to do circular peyote. If you've never done circular peyote before, the basic mantra that you're going to want to keep in your head is pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. So I'm going to pick up a bead, another one of my delicas. I'm going to skip over the next bead in my circle, and I'm going to go into the bead after that. So another way to think about that is if I'm coming out of bead A, I'm skipping over bead B and I'm going into bead C. Just like that. And you'll notice we have our little bead right there. The bead that we just picked up is going to sit next to the bead we skipped over. Just like that. So we're going to keep going around in that same fashion. Pick up a bead, skip a bead, go through. Just like that, all the way around. Once we get all the way to the other side, I will come back to you and show you what's called our step up. Okay, I've gone almost all the way around, and I have a spot left for one more bead. So where we would normally be putting our needle is this bead right here, but we're also going to do what's called a step up. And a step up is any step in any stitch that needs to finish off the step you're working on, and it sets you up to start the next step. Not all stitches have them, but in this case, even count circular peyote or tubular peyote does have one. So that additional bead that we have to go through is the very first one that we added in the previous row. Just like that. So you'll go through two beads at the same time. So our new bead that we just pulled down, you can see it pull right into place, and you can see the bead that we went through and then the bead that we had to step up into. And again, that step up bead is the first bead that we added when we first started our peyote, or the first bead of the previous round. So now we're going to do another round of peyote on the inside of this circle, and it's a lot easier now because we're going in and out of the beads that are already popped up. There's no more digging in, and there's also no more questioning whether you're going into the right one, because it's simply the next bead that's popped up. So we're going to use a smaller bead this time. We're going to use our 15, and when you start to go in with a smaller bead, this starts to pull your peyote inward. Just like when you start to use a larger bead, it flares your peyote out. So I'm going to go through the next bead that's popped up. And you're going to see how the bead I just picked up is going to sit in the little empty space. Just like that. Now I'm going to repeat that going all the way around until I get back for another step up. Okay, I've gone all the way around with my little gold 15s, and I've done my step up, and this was the last 15 that I added right here, and then I went through and then did my step up. Okay, so my step up was going through that delica that I was supposed to be going through, but then up right into the 15, and that was the very first 15 that I added when I started this row of gold. So now I'm simply going to travel to my outer ring here. So I want to be coming out of one of my popped up beads on the outside. So all I'm going to do is travel up diagonally through one of my delicas, and then go straight up and reverse my direction and go through one of the delicas on the outside. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and do a peyote row with more delicas, so the same bead that's on the outside, and then at that point we're going to be able to start to incorporate our stone, because what happens when you continue to do peyote with the same size bead, so like before I said, when we used a smaller bead it pulls in, when we use a larger bead it flares out. If we continue to use the same size bead, it just simply forms up as a tube or as a cylinder. So that's what starts to form the wall that's going to hold in our Rivoli, and it's going to be sitting right here on the outer edge of the Rivoli. So I'm going to go around once, and I'm going to do a row with my delicas again, and that's going to allow us to start to sit our Rivoli into here. We'll end up doing some peyote with our 15s to help pull it in even more, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, as you can see, after doing another row on the outside with our delicas and giving it a nice good tug, that wall starts to form and we now have a seat that we can sit our Rivoli in. So you can see because we pulled in on the back, that's what's keeping the Rivoli from falling out of the back. And now we're going to be able to pull in with the 15s on the front, and that's going to keep it from falling out of the front. So I just did my step up, which again was picking up the last delica that I needed, going through the delica that I know I have to go into, and then that one extra delica, which is the first one I added for that row. So just that step up, as you can see, it goes in sort of an up direction. And then I gave it a nice good tug. That really helped pull that wall right up. Now, at this point, I do like to hold my Rivoli in the beadwork, and I'm going to be tugging a little bit harder as I do this round with the 15s to help pull that peyote stitch in nice and tight. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Let me get some of these beads in here. And it's all the same peyote stitch, picking up a bead, going up through the next popped up bead, or going into the next popped up bead. And it works up nice and quickly now because, again, all the beads that we need to go through are popped up. Okay, I gave it a nice good tug. You can see how it starts to pull in, and it starts to hold our Rivoli in. So I'm going to go around once with the 15s and then once more with the 15s, so we have a nice thick gold border going around. So I will be back in a minute to show you what that looks like. Okay, I've gone ahead and I did my 2 rows with my gold 15s, and our Rivoli is held in place tightly and perfectly. That's what the back looks like. That lovely coral colored lacquered back on that Rivoli. Again, this is Ultra Coral Reef AB, which is absolutely stunning and Pantone's color of the year. So that's what we have here. Now the last thing I did is I just traveled up into my delicas, just a few beads, 2 beads actually, diagonally, so that way I'm coming out of sort of the outer rim of my little piece here, because now we're going to be doing a little beaded loop, and that beaded loop is what's going to go on this jump ring. Now, had I just done the beaded loop through the loop of the clasp, our Rivoli would have sat a little awkwardly. So as you wear the bracelet, the Rivoli would have wanted to have sat up against you the wrong way, not nice and flat against your wrist. So that's why that jump ring was so important. But in this case, we're going to do just a really pretty little beaded loop. So I'm going to pick up 8 of my 15s, and I'm going to loop into my jump ring here, and I'm going to travel back around and loop back through the same delica that I'm coming out of. We get a lovely little beaded loop right here. Now the trick here is reinforcement. So while this is just a dangle on a bracelet and it's not really going to have any pull, we still want to make sure that all this work wasn't for nothing, and we want to go back around through this loop a few times. I want to make sure that I've gone through this loop a total of 3 times, so 3 thread paths going through. And it's okay if it starts to loosen up a little bit as you're going back through it. Once you go through that delica again, you can give it a nice good tug. You can see it got a little bit loose. That's totally normal, totally fine. You can give it a nice good tug, and it's going to tighten it right up. Okay, so I'm going to reinforce that loop just a little bit more, and I'll be back in a minute to show you the final product.